suggesting that folks we now call gay identified, homosexual identified, have always been a part of the human variety of beings and the way people are. But they get handled according to the way history is and the way historical forces are. And we're in this time and place, here and now. And how do we get going in a more and more serious way and pick up a legacy which is not really destroyed because it's been forgotten, or its immediate presence now has been destroyed, or its presence back even to 1,000 years has been destroyed. One can pick it up from earlier than 1,000 years ago, for example. One can turn to other cultures, for example, around this matter, in terms of it. And even better than those things, those are good things, even better than them is bring it into the future. Now to bring it even more into the future, to take advantage of the opportunity to go even further in the future. So I was myself personally never interested in just really figuring this stuff out and where to live, in the sense of discovering life to be merely eating and shitting, so to speak, or having a good time, or being in the moment, in a kind of shallow or so one can be in the moment in a deep way, so I don't sound like I'm knocking being in the moment if one is truly in a way that's initiatory, on a truly depthful spiritual level. But if it's for consumerist enjoyment, if it's for being in the moment only to be in the next moment, that's not a good idea. That's a misuse of consciousness, to be in one moment only to be in, have that be that moment in order for that to be the next moment, and the next moment alone. And that's one as being is just in the next moment. If one is with that, for example, let's call it, if we were going to the East, to aspects of China or Japan, you might call this Zen. You might want to be with the moment by moment. A discoverable system, not just Zen, many systems actually. It's an example of the kind of way of being with that moment that opens you into a tremendous journey of alchemy, self-transformation. It's just self-discovery, certainly, discovery of consciousness, but much more than that. Okay, that's an example of that kind of stuff. I'm talking about being homosexual in this way, in this sense. I'm not saying it's something different to be homosexual. So I didn't know this, or have to come to this view, okay, right away. Okay, if I'm starting the history that I'm describing, already I was at one level of awareness you can picture with the therapist who stood in the door, blocked the door when I tried to leave that kind of therapy. Okay, so then I'm a different kind of awareness than when I'm in the bisexual group, and I realized that I was being hypocritical to do that. So I decided I couldn't do that anymore. I wasn't, because inwardly it wasn't fulfilling enough. I was probably hiding from myself. I discovered I was lying and playing games with myself, so I had to join the group, and then the gay group, and become a buddy with the other gay guys. That's the first time I did that. So gay men had never done this before, and this is why we could be so attractive. Berkeley and the surrounding, the Bay Area, was attracted lots of unrooted people, lots of people who thought oddly and differently. Historically, it's a place for a lot of balls to begin with, as some of you might be familiar with. But more than that, this whole notion of calling yourself homosexual or gay or lesbian with a sense other than condemnation, and even going further than not having condemnation, but rather it's a kind of affirmation of being gay. And not only that, but being able to recognize it in others, and so showing solidarity with other like-minded folks was extremely exciting for many people in a spontaneous way that involved large masses of people. Usually folks would come to these talks we were offering in the basement of the church. They'd come week after week for a while, and then eventually they'd get integrated into the gay scene. It was burgeoning homosexual scene at that time in the Bay Area, on several areas of the Bay Area. I could feel we were like processing almost like a whole generation of young gay men. Many of whom later died from AIDS. A few years later died from AIDS, many of these same folks. And then in between periods, so these were the earliest of the 70s, and then when AIDS came on the scene at the end of the 70s, the period in between was a strange, almost paradise-like world, but scary, because you could try out these outrageous, if you were homosexual or had homosexual interests, you could really go for it in ways that were utterly unimaginable previously. Ways that sociologically or privately for the person would be completely unimaginable to live out. And were changed in many important ways, as you know, historically by the advent of the HIV and the problems it brought about. But early on, it was a peculiar thing just to try and the Gay Men's Collective was a motley crew of guys. We were about 12 in all. Usually about 7 or 8 were, of us were serious about coming regular, and keeping all kind of going. We'd have potlucks before our meetings, we met regularly and stuff like that, in addition to operating in different groups. And we tried to relate. Most of the folks were activists because they came out of a Marxist tradition. Some of them were from New York. Several of them were interesting characters. Several later died. One committed suicide, by the way, from car exhaust, eventually. Was one of these New York immigrants from a Marxist background. There were several people like this. Sounds like getting fierce fights with them in the groups, because I wasn't nasty and hinky. It was more like, I still wondered why we were homosexual and why it was interesting to be homosexual and what to make out of it all. And the Marxist folks would poo-poo that form of speculation because it was, so to speak, airy-fairy, and all that was a product of late capitalist culture and brought us too far away from, too much into what might be called the superstructure of the issue, which was really, the issue was the means of production. So you can picture that I myself was not what we would call gay-centered. The folks who were running the group were not what we would call gay-centered. No one was gay-centered. We were trying to be gay-affirmative, I might call it now. And we were stumbling in a world which was coming out of being very anti-gay. And around the gay folks, there were some liberals who were trying to be supportive of, still it's mainly a very hostile world, very hostile, negative world. There were a few other brave souls, as you may know historically at that time, in the very early 70s, who wanted to help out. So in addition to myself or others who were members of this collective, and being homosexual, which was still very scary and challenging. Few people wanted to be like this and do in this kind of way. And we invited, a fellow had moved out from back east who'd gotten tired of living a closet life himself. And there were many various folks doing that. A little later, a man about the same time, slightly later, I think, a man named Arthur Evans, who just again died 2 weeks ago, did the same thing. But Arthur had been a big gay activist, so many people were moving out from the East Coast for homosexual reasons to the West Coast, and many of them were going to the San Francisco area. And this man had been a very prominent closet man, married with 2 children when he decided that he couldn't take it anymore. His name was Don Clark. Okay, I didn't know this at the time. He had an amicable separation and then divorce from his wife. And they made settlement of the marriage arrangements. And he moved out to the Bay Area spontaneously and opened the first practice for people who wanted to be what we call gay-identified. He was the first practitioner to present himself as gay. Up front, in public, in professional presentations, in presentations before other people, in what he was trying to understand and assist. He was the first person to do this. And he quickly became, homosexuals in the Bay Area quickly became aware as soon as he was there. And some guy in our group, our collective, mentioned that Don was offering, because he was a licensed psychologist, he was offering to do support for us, or supervision, what we're trying to do in the talks on Friday nights. Because, as you can imagine, a lot of intimate, powerful things would come up. And none of us were trained in psychological skills or abilities. We were just folks, so to speak, off the street who were running these things. And sometimes people would come in with difficult things, or they'd be in delicate places. How do you handle, for example, someone who's terribly suicidal? Or you want to encourage them to come out with perhaps accepting being gay, but perhaps they still live at home in a family that hates them. Maybe they've got a father whose father says, "I'll kill anyone who's homosexual." So this guy, Don, was offering to come out for nothing and just to talk for a while about it. Because we had questions. Someone mentioned that he was available and around for this kind of stuff. And we all agreed that would be great. So this guy came, Don Clark. He had an assistant with him too, a graduate student. It's a local alternative graduate school for psychologists. And he had this guy, a very cute fellow, who came but didn't say anything. Just kind of, I don't know what he was there, that Don already had someone assisting him in what he was up to. And he gave a little talk on, I guess basically I call it being gay, but later we might call it being gay-affirmative. And that was really important to do that. It was a big transition for many people to become gay-affirmative from the world that people had come out of. For like a lot of individuals, for example, who come to these rap groups, we call them gay men's raps. These Friday night raps, that's what we call them, Friday night gay men's raps. He talked a little about that and the importance of that, and that this important historical tradition will nurture that. And I'd never heard, so to speak, an authority figure, someone who had a degree, someone who was licensed, someone who was a professional and acted that way, and presented as someone of that kind of stature, who was not only accepting of being homosexual, and not only upfront about that, but it was integrated with what he was saying. He was talking about homosexual topics as a homosexual and as a psychologist. It was mind-boggling for me. I'm very interested in this whole area. This is so different than how people were, how anything could be, to see this man be like this. And he already had someone who, with him, was interested in this kind of stuff, what he was talking about. I was completely blown away by what he had to say and just his whole stance. He could be out and accept himself and feel affirmative about homosexual desire and feelings himself and feel that way towards others and really be that way. He didn't feel like he was pulling my leg and being affirmative, or he was trying to be affirmative. He really was that way, and he was strong in that way. I've never seen anything like that before in person. I've never seen someone strongly be pro-homosexual. Even now, it's still a rare item. If you look around you, where do you see anything that's homosexual? And when you do see anything that's homosexual, where do you see anything of any substance? When you do see something of substance, where do you see the substance according to people we would call homosexuals in ancient times, which no one would know about now? We don't. No one sees it now. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist or can't be cultivated. It must be cultivated, in my opinion. This must be cultivated. Now, I did not see that at the time. Like so, for example, now I've reached the point when I met Don Clark. Don Clark is the first gay psychologist. He's the first person to say, I'm going to try and understand and work with psychology. It's this kind of field of study. And be gay. And be upfront about that. There were other people before that, they were always equivocal. They always questioned that. They always wondered about that. They always have to live in a world that hates that. And it takes a lot of something if you're in a kind of world where you're the only one and you want to be like this. Like if he goes to a psychological convention. As you know, they had to battle with the psychiatrist to stop them from treating homosexuality as a disease. That happened in 1973. That's after the period I'm talking to you about. After the period I'm talking to you about. So, but some of us are really interested in things get like they, at least in some ways like they are now. how to do that then.